This was more of a tradition we had back in the 90s. As us kids got older, we kind of discontinued things. Anyway, every year, every summer, we used to have these really big family reunions in the campgrounds in Nottingham, Oregon. We would all arrive on Friday after the long drive and flying. Then, on Saturday, we would host this massive family cookout. We would stay all the way until Sunday night, and then everybody would either get hotels and fly home or make the long drive back. Well, it was Friday, around 10 p.m., and all of us had just got there. Or most of us, some of us just getting there, finishing setting up all of our tents and getting all of our equipment ready. Intermingling and having conversation, hanging out and seeing long-lost family you haven't seen in over 12 months. This is usually the time that I would go and see my cousins and go play with them. Since, during this point, we were all about the same age. There were 5 of us in total. Me, my older cousin Ryan, who was 2 years older than I, Sarah, 3 years older than me, David, 2 years younger than me, and Jess, 5 years older than me. Of course, those aren't their real names, but for the sake of the story, you get the point. We decided to go play off in the woods, while all the adults kind of intermingled and drank beer and had fun, enjoying the first night together and not seeing each other in a long while. For a kid, it's a magical place to go play in the woods. Surrounded by white bark pine and Douglas firs, you can easily get lost in these magical woods. Stereotypical of when you think of the Pacific Northwest, Oregon is the place to go to. It was beginning to get dark. While I did mention it was about 10 p.m., I don't think it was quite 10 p.m. because it was still just a little bit light out. Enough that you had to bring a light, but not totally pitch dark yet. And since this was in July, I know it doesn't get totally dark till at least 10. Anyway, so we're out there in the woods, and we decide to go play hide and seek. Of course, I'm it, being almost the youngest. After I count to 60, I go off and try to find my cousins, all of which I find. But before I find David, I could have sworn I saw him hiding behind one of the bigger pine trees up a small ridge. I see this figure crouched there behind a tree, and I say to him, "Haha, found you." But he didn't move, so I thought he was just ignoring me. And that way, I walked back to the tree where I originally counted to 60. Me and my cousins talked more, and David popped up out of his hiding spot a little ways away. And I asked him, very irritated, why he didn't pop out of his hiding spot when I called him. And he looked at me confused, asking me what I meant by that I had never found him. I told him I'd found him right behind the tree up there, right by that ridge. And he just shook his head and told me, no, that wasn't me. Which I thought was kind of weird, but in that moment, I just thought he was trying to play mind tricks on me, so I just wrote it off as nothing. The night continued, and about 11 p.m., we had a campfire, s'mores, we talked, we laughed, we had a good time, and we settled down for the night. The next day, we indulged in a lot of fun family activities, hung out with friends, all the usual stuff that families and kids will do at a campout. As it got to about later afternoon, I'd say maybe 3, 4, 5 p.m., we all decided to go play off in the woods yet again, when there was a lot more light out. This night, we were going to play the same game, but I was not going to be it. This time, I made Ryan be it, so he counted to 60 while all of us found and ran behind pine trees to hide behind. I decided I wanted to be the very last one to be found, so I ran back as far as I could, running up the small ridgeline, where I found that tall figure standing behind the tree yesterday that I thought was David. Of course, in this moment, I had completely forgotten all about it, so I just pushed my way back there even further, going back, and at one point, where as I'm going, all of a sudden, the forest floor just collapses on me, and it probably drops maybe 5 feet down into a small little hole, which led down into a tunnel, angling about 80 degrees downward. I fell on my butt, and it hurt like a son of a gun. I quickly pulled myself up, and something large was coming up out of the tunnel, up to the ground. As I'm pulling myself up out of this hole and trying to recollect my own brain from the shock of having fallen down in this 5-foot hole, What I see coming out of that tunnel was a nightmare. It was this white, horrible, disfigured-looking face that I can't even begin to describe. It was terrifying. It looked like pieces of rotting flesh and fangs and dead eyes reaching towards me. I just began screaming as loud as I could, clambering my way out of the hole and running back to my cousins as fast as I could. I didn't care about hide and go seek anymore. I didn't care about not getting found. I didn't care about the camping trip, the cookout, none of it. I wanted to escape, badly, from that thing in that tunnel. I jumped down from the ridge, ran to my cousins, who at this point were now exiting their hiding spots with curious looks on their faces, wondering why their youngest cousin, or second youngest cousin, was screaming his head off, having a full-blown panic attack. And I told them exactly what had happened and exactly what I saw. Ryan decided he would go check it out himself. So, him and my other cousins go back there, but I told them don't, it's not safe, and I refused to go back. So I think Ryan just went back there himself. About 4 or 5 minutes later, he comes back, shaking his head. He saw the hole in the ground, and what looked to be a tunnel that led down, but he didn't see anything out of it or inside the tunnel. But he also told me he didn't really spend a lot of time looking, and he refused to jump down in the hole and look deeper in the tunnel. I was pretty shaken up, and I refused to just simply believe that what I saw was just a mere imagination. And my cousins, bless them, were very caring. I told them I wanted to go back to camp, and I'm done in the forest for the night. So we all go back to camp, and my family can very visibly see that I'm shaken up and bothered by something. So they begin asking me questions. What's wrong? What happened? And I tell them, I just saw a big bear in the forest. It just scared me is all. They all just kind of laugh and chuckle and say, yeah, there are black bear around here. You gotta be careful. And proceed on with the cookout. Well, after sitting down at the bench for a few more hours, it was now probably closer to 7 or 8 p.m. I remember because it was getting pretty dusky outside, and I think all my cousins were asking me if I wanted to go play again, which I told them after what happened earlier, I think I'm just going to sit here and play it safe, which they respected. They went off and played in the woods. Who knows doing what? I assume hide and seek, but they never told me. I don't even think it was 30 minutes later, because it hadn't been that long, but Ryan actually comes back, along with Sarah, and they are both terrified, or so the looks on their face tell it, and they both tell me, we believe you, we saw what it is you saw. Now, they referred to what we saw as a deer zombie thing, but I don't know what we saw. I don't know how to begin to describe it. It was completely terrifying, looking like something curated out of a child's nightmare. But I didn't sit there, stare at it, and observe it long enough to come to a conclusion of what this thing could have been. But after they told me what they saw, it had to have been the same thing. They were out there playing in the woods, while I was sitting on the bench, and they all went to go check out the same hole that was there before, the one that I had fallen into, that also had the tunnel in part of it. They said, as they got around the hole, they could see this thing climbing up out of the tunnel towards them. They all screamed and ran after seeing it. My other 2 cousins were in the tent, probably hiding, scared crapless. I didn't believe them at first. I thought they were pulling a prank on me, and trying to just sympathize with me, but I asked them to describe what I saw, and they actually explained it in more vivid detail than I did, which is how I knew what they saw. My uncle came, saw we were all visibly shaken, and sat down next to me and my cousins for a little while, and began talking to them. I could not overhear their conversation, but then a little later, I saw him talking to some of the other people and my own parents. Later on that night, my dad comes in my tent and asks me, son, is there a big black bear back in the woods that's scaring you guys? You gotta be careful out here. A black bear won't really hurt you, but they can if you get too close. You gotta be careful. You don't want to mess with bears. After that, Sunday came, and we decided not to go into the woods that day. Just play it low. And by about Sunday night came, and we were leaving. And that's pretty much the end of my camping experience. So, zombie deer monster in the deep woods of Nottingham, Oregon. Let's not meet again. Back before I moved in 2014, from about 2011 to 2014, I was hiking all around the Adirondacks in New York State. In fact, me and my friends became quite the outdoorsmen, really putting ourselves out there in the wild, learning everything we could, from survival, reading books about it, watching shows about it, and even doing our own little survival test to see how many days we can go out there with limited supplies and survive. I made it about 6 days at one point, but that was enough for me. I think besides being crazy like that, for me, it was just enjoying the outback and how calm and serene nature can really be. And while 99% of my camping and outdoor experiences were all positive, I only had one negative one, and this one sticks out to me. I'm going to be sharing that with you today. This was in the summer of 2013, a year before I would move. I was by myself, as I did a lot of solo hiking and camping. It's what I was accustomed to. This day, I was hiking off of a dirt road that wasn't well traveled or even used all that much. There were also several popular game trails leading off this dirt road, connecting to several other older logging roads that were no longer in use. This was camping out in the backcountry, how it should be done. I took everything I needed to survive on my own for 5 days, which was the plan, just in case I ran into some rough terrain or got lost. I wasn't following an exact path. I was loosely exploring, but I was looking for a lake that was close by, which it's important to bring enough food and water. I had brought along several packets of beef jerky, bottles of water, everything I would need to be kosher for the next few days. But it wasn't until the very first night where things took a different turn. I eventually found the lake. It became about 5 p.m. I set up my one-man tent, had a little cookout, even caught a trout, which I ate with my dinner. It was delicious. Which then I sat by the fire and just enjoyed the quiet in the lake. And then putting out my fire, retiring to my tent at roughly 8 or 9 p.m. And as I'm falling asleep, I hear what sounds like a man screaming bloody murder not too far off. I know there's one of those old abandoned logging roads probably about a half-mile away from this lake. In fact, that's one of the ways I found my way here, was connecting through a game trail. And from where I was at, the scream sounded like it was going up and down that road, over and over, but it was in rhythmic patterns, like somebody kept screaming and screaming out. And then it would stop, and it would start up again. It would start, stop, and then it would sort of change pitch and timbre. I remember lying there thinking to myself, what animal makes that noise? And being completely perplexed, trying to match every single animal I could to the strange noise I was hearing. But it still sounded too human-like for it to be anything that I knew of. I've heard of wolves, I've heard bear, I've heard all sorts of animals even in distress, and none of them sounded like this. I guess you could say it was a mountain lion, but even mountain lion don't sound as odd as this. One thing here I want to point out is I could hear that whatever was making the noise had to have been of considerable size. This is because of the volume, power, and the amount of bass it carried in its voice. You could feel it, which deeply put a bad feeling in my stomach. After a while, the noises stopped, and I was able to fall asleep. The next morning, I tried and hike around a little bit, maybe see what I could find, while keeping my base camp at the lakeshore. I did not find or see anything that was out of the ordinary, and so I spent the afternoon and evening fishing, caught a couple more trout, had trout again for dinner, ate that with a can of beans. I was so stuffed that I was literally nodding off while sitting by the fire. It was perfect. So, again, I decided it was time to retire, climbing into my tent and crashing out. This time, I awoke in the middle of the night to that same screaming noise as the night before, only this time, it was on the other end of the lake, and much, much closer. Instead of moving north to south, this sound sounded like it was coming closer to the tent, although still on the other side of the lake. And for the first time, I'm beginning not to feel safe, because I don't know what's making this noise, and I can't think of any animal that would possibly reproduce the sound or reason why. I can't even replicate the noise myself. It reminded me of something you'd hear out of a horror movie. But keep in mind that the thoughts of Bigfoot or a monster never once crossed my mind. I just figured it had to have been some animal in distress or something going on. I'm a very logical person. There had to have always been an explanation for anything that happens. But for this, I could draw no conclusions. And just like the first night, after a little while, the sound stopped and I was able to fall back asleep. Now, I get up the third morning. I do the usual. Make some coffee on the fire using my percolator. Wake up, stretch, and go on a day hike. This time, I thought it would be better to investigate where I heard the screaming from before, which was on the other side of the lake. So that's where I hiked over to, which to get to, you have to go over a lot of fallen timber and old brush. So it took me about an hour or two to reach over there. And when I did, I was kind of shocked at what I saw. In the soft mud of the lake shoreline were these massive prints. I didn't have a tape measure or a cell phone with me. I mean, even if I did, I don't get any cell service anyway. But they easily could have been 17 to 18 inches long, maybe 5 inches wide. They were very vertical, long and slender. They kind of came back and tapered off at the heel, and the feet branched off in 3 large toes that you could tell had clear claw marks. They walked in a bipedal pattern, up to the shoreline and then back towards where the rocks were, up into the trees. It looked as if something had come down from the tree line, down to the shore, and then back up into the tree line, almost a zigzag pattern. It must have been heavy too. The indentations were at least half an inch deep. The mud was pretty soft, so I had to be careful not to get stuck in the mud myself. But something big was walking around here just last night. I felt really unsure what to think. There's no bipedal animal out here that I'm aware of. I know apes exist, but apes are the only other animals I can think of off the top of my head that are bipedal. But there's no apes out here. And ape prints don't look anything like this. This almost reminded me of some sort of large bird or a lizard or something. And I could not for the life of me understand why the prints were bipedal and not quadrupedal, or the size alone. That was also weird. But I tried to not let it get to me, and so I continued the rest of my day hiking out, and returning in the evening time, where instead of fishing like the last 2 nights, I thought I would just eat a couple protein bars and have the rest of my beans. Then, it was time to go to bed, so I climbed into my sleeping bag, expecting round 3, and eventually fell asleep. But I was extremely on edge and very anxious for something to happen. I don't know why. It was just a feeling. I can remember that night too. The crickets and noise of the forest was much quieter than usual. The last couple nights, the crickets were alive. I mean, the first night there, I almost thought I couldn't sleep, they were so noisy. But this night, everything was just too quiet. It was a very restless night of sleep. I would wake up, fall back asleep. Wake up, fall back asleep. Each time, the life around the lake just being so quiet. And then, sometime during the very early morning hours, probably 4 or 5 p.m., just as the sun was peeking up over the horizon, I could have sworn I heard something heavy walking around my camp, but I can't know that exactly. So I wake up about 6, 7 o'clock, get up, and I notice those same footprints as the other day that I saw by the shoreline are over near my camp, probably about 100 or so feet away, parallel to the tree line, since I'm about 100 plus feet away from the tree line itself. Now is when I start to get bad feelings, that something else is here with me, some large animal that I have no idea if it's an omnivore, herbivore, or a carnivore. I remember that day too. I thought I would just stick by the lake and not go hiking as much. I just felt unsafe and uncertain. The morning bled to afternoon, which bled into the evening, which would bleed into night. And I'd try to calm my nerves during most of the day by fishing. And so that night, I thought to myself, maybe if I stay up a little later than usual with the fire, I'll maybe get a chance to see whatever this thing is, and maybe that'll put my mind to rest. So I had the fire roaring, I was staying up, enjoying myself, listening to the night. The crickets were there, but still very quiet, not as loud as they had been, and they eventually got more quiet and more quiet and more quiet, till they eventually stopped. But I didn't notice it right away. And then, beyond the light of the fire, I could hear something very heavy moving around, coming in my direction. I began to get very nervous and anxious, this feeling in the pit of my stomach like I might be in danger, the same way you would feel if a bear were to come in your campsite at night. Whatever it was, the more I listened, it sounded bipedal. The footsteps, they were heavy thudding. But because the moon was blocked by some overcast, it was very dark, and the only other light that I was provided was the light of the fire. Anything beyond the fire's reach was pretty much pitch black. I had my flashlight, but part of me didn't want to risk shining it on something that I did not want to see, or would regret seeing, if you know what I mean. But luckily, I kept a little pistol by my side, just in case. You never know when traveling in the outdoors when you might run into a sticky situation, so I always kept that near me. But I began to grow more and more tense, and this feeling in my stomach, like this knot, just kept getting worse and worse. And that's when I started hearing the footsteps more and more, getting closer. They started off far away, up by the tree line, but now they sounded like they were slowly descending down the embankment, right towards my camp. But not continuously. It would be like a few steps and then stopping. Pause. A few more steps, stopping. Pausing for a while. A few more steps. And this went on for at least 30 to 45 minutes. Almost as if whatever it was trying to be as sneaky and stealthy as possible while not being heard. All the more while me growing incredibly anxious. At one point, I could hear this thing just beyond the light of the fire, maybe 20 feet from my tent. Although I couldn't visually see it, I knew it was there. I could hear it. And at one point or another, I pulled out my gun and fired 3 shots into the air. Everything went silent after that, and I sat there and waited, and waited. And maybe within 30 minutes to an hour of nothing but complete silence, the crickets began to return. I never heard this thing climb back up to the tree line. It was just dead silence. I actually fell asleep in my camping chair and woke up to the daylight and my fire smoldering. What was pretty terrifying was when there was daylight, I got up out of my chair, checked on all my stuff. Everything was untouched, but there were these large prints, the same ones over by the opposite side of the lake and up by the tree line the day before. I was right. They were about 20 feet away from where I was at, maybe 10 feet beyond the light of the fire, and you could see they kind of had zigzagged down from the tree line, down right where the tent was, and you could tell they went right back up, although I never actually heard it when it had gone back up. But oh man, that sent shivers down my spine. I was more than creeped out, so I dismantled my camp and decided I would go and try and find a different place to camp for the remainder day. After undoing everything, I hiked back to the old logging road and went to the other side, which was probably another good 4-mile hike. And that night, I camped out in a little meadow, where things seemed to be much more calm and sweet. But still, at one point or another, I swore that I heard that same screaming sound, except far off in the distance. But maybe it was just my own paranoia. The following day, I went back to civilization. Like I said originally, that was really the only negative hiking experience I've ever had. All the rest have been positive. Whatever was out there with me, I'm sure it wasn't friendly. This was my first time at a sleepaway camp. I wasn't exactly excited about spending the whole summer away from home, but luckily for me, it started off on a good note. It was Friday night of my first week at camp, so all the campers got together by the fire pit to sing some songs around the fire before everybody headed back to their cabins. After singing some songs around the fire, most of us went back. Well, we all got back to our cabins. The girls' cabin had theirs in cabins E and F. Us boys, we had our cabin in cabins A and B. Each cabin held about 8 to 10 kids, depending on how many were in each one. I and the rest of the other teenage boys were in Cabin B. Cabin A, of course, had only about 8. That's also where the counselor slept too, because I guess they were short on counselor cabins, I think. So we're getting ready for bed, and we're lying down, joking, talking, like most of us do anyway. And as I feel most of us were getting settled down into bed, and getting ready to get some shut-eye, we heard some rustling in the bushes outside the cabin, followed by frantic pounding on the door, and a very panicked, "Let me in! Let me in now!" And so all of us kind of shot up from bed, looking around. One of the boys jumped up from his bed and opened the door. It was one of the boys from Cabin A, who looked completely pale and panicked. He said there was somebody trying to get into the cabin. This big, tall figure that was trying to open the door. He said it couldn't have been a man. It was huge, wide, and very hairy, and he was really spooked. Some of us laughed at him, while the others just tried to understand where he was coming from. We decided it would be best to go get the counselor, so most of us, except for maybe 3 or 4, walked over to Cabin A, where a lot of the other boys in there were spooked too. The counselor was not around, so at this point, me and the other boys from Cabin B are thinking, alright, this is clearly a very elaborate, well set up prank. The counselor got you. But before we can even begin to really think about where he was, the boys in Cabin A were just screaming, terrified by something. They kept saying the same thing the other boy did, that this thing tried to break into the cabin, rattling the door handle, banging on the windows. They said it looked like a big gorilla. It was this man in a large suit or something. They were completely petrified. All of them were shaking. And so maybe at this point, we thought, okay, either something really did happen, or the counselor is really playing a prank. So all of us left boys in Cabin A, and we decided to go and try and find the counselor. So we exit Cabin A, and we're walking back to Cabin B, when we see the counselor, followed by another counselor. They both have handguns, and they're telling us in the most stern voice, "Boys, get back to your cabin now. We have an issue." And the couple that were with me from Cabin A fled back to Cabin A. And the few of us from Cabin B, well, most of us, fled back to Cabin B, including me. A few stayed behind to try and talk to him, but he wasn't taking it. He demanded we all return to our cabins, that there was an issue going on. So we get back in Cabin B, and some of us are a little spooked, but the rest of us are just trying to laugh it off and, alright, this is just some big joke, no worries, let's just go to bed, this is clearly not a big deal. And then we hear a very terrifying sound. Gunshots. Bam, bam. Immediately, all of us jump up. We think something happened, so we go rushing out the door to see. Cabin A is beyond eyesight, so we can't see anything, but we hear screaming. A lot of us, or some of us, go running over to Cabin A, and the counselor is outside, pointing off into the night. The boys in Cabin A are freaking out. He sees us and screams at us, "I thought I told you guys to go back in your cabins." And then we hear this horrendous scream off from the woods. It sounded like a demon. It made me nearly poop my pants. And so all of us go running, screaming back into Cabin B, where we huddled around, waiting for daylight, not really sure what was going to happen. The night was eerily quiet. No crickets, no sounds, no more gunshots. The counselor did not come to check up on us. We didn't see anything outside our cabin. We didn't hear anything. But I think all of us were pretty scared, especially after hearing that roar, which there's no way you could have not have heard it. Even the other boys who stayed behind in this cabin also heard the roar. It was loud. Which is why I say that most of us probably got barely any sleep that night. When sunlight finally came, which felt like it was never going to happen, we exited the cabin. Going to breakfast, which was at 7, there was the counselor, the boys from A, and all the girls. Even the girls were asking what that roar was. They had heard it too. The boys from Cabin A would not talk about it. And when we tried to question the counselor, he said it's non-negotiable. We are not discussing it. And seemed pretty shaken up over the whole thing. He stuttered more. He was very pale. He looked kind of sick. and you could tell something was just very wrong. But he was trying as hard as he could to be professional and press onward with the daily camp activities. It took several days, maybe an entire week after that, for things to return to somewhat normal. If you could even call that even remotely normal. But eventually everything did die down and calm down. But that will hands down always be the most frightening experience I've ever had while camping. I was walking around with my friend, and it was roughly 8 p.m. at night. We were just talking, stopping to take breaks. We loved our night hikes. We had heard something, though, that sounded like footsteps not too far away from us. We got nervous. With it being dark outside, there's no reason anybody would be out walking around, especially without a light, out here in the woods. And unfortunately, our flashlights kept going out. The sound continued for about 30 more seconds, and we'd keep hearing it on and off. It was getting closer, closing the distance, rustling through the trees. My friend tried to play it off and say that somebody was just casually making their way back to their campsite or cabin, but there really wasn't any of that out here. Sure, we had come from about a mile away from our campsite, but why would anybody be out this far? None of it made sense. There were no cars, parking lots, roads. In fact, we were just exploring the deep woods, and it was later at night. Why would somebody be out here alone, stalking us? When this is going on, you can only assume the worst, and so we decided to walk a little further. Maybe the sounds would eventually stop, but they didn't. Instead, they closed in on us more and more, and at one point or another, my friend and I decided it would probably be safest to head back to avoid any issues that we might have. We ran about as fast as we possibly could all the way back to our tent, hopefully being safe. As soon as we kicked off and started running, the figure, or whoever it was in the trees, did not follow us. In fact, they probably wanted us gone. I don't know if maybe somebody had a cabin nearby and they were trying to chase us away, but whoever it was got their way. And that was the last time that my friends and I, on camping, would go be exploring the woods on a trail at night, with minimal lighting. Yeah, I regret it. I used to go hiking quite a bit, and camping too with my buddies, when I used to live back in Idaho. Man, there'd be nights, I'm telling you, where we would make the best bear kebabs. But after graduating high school, I decided it was time for a change of scenery, much like many people do when moving out of high school. But during those summer months, I'll never forget it. Some of the best outdoor memories I've ever made. But today, I wanted to share with you one that truly terrified me. It's one that even to this day, I still can't explain. This was the summer before my senior year of high school. My friends and I decided to go up to the Sawtooth Mountains in Idaho and decide to all camp out in one giant tent. If I remember correctly, I think it was like a 20-man tent, but I could be wrong. Either way, though, it was very big. Perfect enough for us 5. After finding our spot, we established who was going to do what. 2 of us set back to do the tent. A couple of us set out to do firewood, and the rest of us were going to help set up camp, get a fire going, get food, etc. After we get everything established, the fire, the food, the wonderful kebabs, and our massive tent all the way set up, it's time to relax and enjoy. Being teenage boys, of course we brought alcohol, but surprisingly, even before the events of the night happened, none of us really got that drunk, if at all. It was just a big old case of beer, nothing too fancy. We cracked open the beer and started getting the food going. Once that was done, we all sat around the campfire, made jokes, having a good time. Talking about what girls we were going to try and date senior year. We had quite the list. We began getting low on fire after a couple of beers and after eating, and so we had the same 2, Bill and Joel, go get us more wood. The same 2 from earlier. They come back about 7 minutes later, with a lot less wood than they normally brought last time. When I asked them, "What gives, guys? Where's all the wood?" They're both pretty pale and pretty scared. They're telling me that they saw something, and so we start asking them. As they're trying to tell us and stuttering and falling over the words, We hear this huge crashing sound that sounds like a tree being felled and falling over. All of our attention shoots back at that where the sound came from. Most of us standing up, completely expecting something to come barreling out of the woods in our direction. It was that loud and that disruptive. To say we were scared in that moment is an understatement. We all collectively agreed it's probably a good idea if we just leave camp now and come back for our stuff in the morning. There's no telling what kind of bear it could be back there. Both my two friends both agreed it was not a bear. It was something else entirely. Well, we left camp, and the next morning we came back, grabbed our stuff, but everything was ran through, torn up, and destroyed. Something had gone through our camp the night before while we were gone and destroyed everything. What it was, I still have nightmares about it to this day. Last year, I went camping with my friends in the woods for the weekend. The experience was terrifying, to say the least. This is the story of one of our encounters during the trip. I'll be honest, I'm not much of an outdoorsy person. Never have been. Probably never will be. But me and some friends got together last summer to do something adventurous. We decided to go camping for a night or two at this spot, deep in the forest, which had trails for mountain biking, hiking, along with some very comfy spots where we could pitch our tents, which would also serve as places where we can cook our food over an open fire. But their parents had a very weird rule. No electronics allowed. Flashlights and lanterns were okay, but no cell phones or tablets. Their parents were really weird about us bringing anything, so they wanted to make sure we got the full, authentic outdoors experience. I guess they were really into that kind of stuff. Anyway, we arrived there about 5 p.m. The sun was just setting over the mountains. We checked out the place and began making dinner, which consisted of only instant ramen. The guys got together and cooked up some hot dogs on sticks, while we girls kept ourselves busy looking for firewood. We really had no idea how to make our own fire, to be honest, but luckily, we found enough dead branches nearby which could serve as our materials. It took us forever, though, and we tried lighting them up one by one, but that was not working, so we eventually had to expedite the process. We finally managed to get our first real fire going. This had taken way longer than expected. We kept feeding it more branches as it got wider, filling the air with smoke, but at least it kept the mosquitoes away. Now, the sun setting made everything look nice and warm, but the sun went down after and everything got really dark very fast. So dark that you could barely see 2 feet ahead of you. Even the stars were kind of hiding tonight. We kept ourselves busy though, chatting and cooking. A couple hours went by, and we had cooked up plenty of food. Everybody was sitting around the campfire, eating, and playing Truth or Dare. The night felt nice, very warm, so we stayed close to the campfire, occasionally putting on more wood or two. At one point, some of us had even fallen asleep. I was awake, of course, still talking with some of us who were still awake, and me and my friend see this bright flash of light coming from somewhere in the woods nearby. It lit up everything like a really bright camera flash. Couldn't see much, but could definitely hear some movement along with the flash. We're all thinking to ourselves, what was that? And then it happens again, only this time closer in our direction. Another flash and loud movement. Then, again, another flash, followed by more movement. The problem was, as we were watching, we didn't see anybody or anything which was the cause of this flash. Just these random full flashes of the woods all around it. My friend were looking at each other horrified, trying to wake up our friends and family around us, trying to point to what it was. It happened a few more times, and then stopped maybe 100 yards out of our campsite. At that point, we could hear this loud mechanical noise, like a large engine running, or a machine going or something, but we could not see anything. One of my friends decided to take a flashlight and run over there to see if he could spot anything. The noise began getting louder and louder, but we could not see anything. He was shining his light, but there was nothing there. But he began to get a really bad feeling and said, "Guys, maybe we should leave." Within minutes, some of us began to get very nauseous and sick, while both of his parents began vomiting, and just like that, The loud humming all of a sudden stopped, and things seemed to go back to normal. But the night stayed relatively quiet. I think we all stayed up pretty late. We were too spooked by whatever we had heard and saw to even try to get some sleep. When morning came, well, the second the sun came up, we packed up everything and moved to a totally different camping spot. We were not going to risk night number 2 of that happening again. I have been camping for a very good portion of my life, so things in the woods really don't bother me too much. But this experience that I had is terrifying. It was the last day of a family vacation at Lake Superior Provincial Park in Canada. We were set up by one of the big cliffs near an abandoned mining town off the edge of a lake. Our cabins are located about 100 yards away from each other. My cabin had me, my parents, and my 2 brothers in it. 2 small beds, plus a fold-out couch that can fit another person. With 7 of us inside, it felt pretty cramped, especially since there's no air conditioning, so we had to leave all the windows open for fresh air during the night. I remember around 2 in the morning, I woke up to use the washroom and realized my little brother was sitting on top of his bed, the fold-out couch, looking towards the open window in the cabin. I asked him what was wrong, but he didn't answer me. He just kept staring outside like he saw something really scary, or should I say someone. He looked like he saw a ghost or something. His face was pure white and had the same look you see on someone's face who just got back from an exorcism. He also looks like it took all his effort not to scream when I walked near him. He was very on edge. Even though I could not see anything unusual through the window, I could tell by his reaction that whatever made him act this way was not normal. He just kept squeezing and hugging onto the bedsheets and kept looking out towards the window. I got a little suspicious about his reaction, so, without saying anything to my brothers or parents, I decided to step outside and investigate myself. I walked near some of the bushes outside my brother's cabin, and I saw something moving in those bushes. It appeared small at first, but then, that's when horror became horror, and it stuck its face out in the open, and I saw it for what it's worth. The first thing it reminded me, if you look up online the Russian sleep experiment, you'll see a picture that looks like a white humanoid, with sharp teeth and dead eyes or something, and pointed ears. That's kind of what this thing reminded me of. As soon as I saw it, I dropped my phone, running and screaming, running back in the cabin, slamming the door. As soon as I did that, me freaking out and panicking woke up my brothers and my parents, who were now all wondering what is going on. Now my dad was pissed. I told him, "You need to shut the windows now. There's something out there." My mom was now worried, and my dad was trying to get a hold of me. "Son, there's nothing out there. Calm down." But I just couldn't shake the feeling. I tried to convince him. "No, I saw it out there. There's something out there. I know it is." But he just would not listen. And finally, he got pissed enough to where he made me sit down next to the bed and warned me if I made another peep, I would be grounded for a long time. So they all tried to go back to sleep, my brothers ignoring me. And my one brother, who was sitting by the open window, just sat there shaking. He didn't say a word the whole time. He knew. We both knew. This story goes back to 2013. I was camping out in the middle of nowhere. I've been going to this campsite now for a couple of years. It always seemed so serene and peaceful. I hardly had to stay on the grounds at all, until at night. Anyway, I was camping with my friends and we all decided to go deeper into the woods. At night, they fell asleep quickly, but it took me longer to fall asleep. I kept hearing lots of noises outside. After about an hour of trying to fall asleep, I began to hear something moving rapidly toward my direction, up until it stopped right next to my tent. I opened my eyes and see this large dark figure not too far away, staring at me. It couldn't have been more than 5 feet from my face. I screamed multiple times, hoping it would go away. The thing didn't budge for another 10 seconds, then slowly retreated back off into the darkness. The whole experience left me petrified. I lay there, thanking God I was still alive. My friend and his family woke up and had no idea what was going on. I told them what had happened. They just thought it was another story. I never went back to that campsite again, even though my friends begged me to come back. I don't think their family was really appreciative of my little outburst. Ever since I was a kid, I've always loved camping. It's back to nature. You get some fresh air and really get to bond with family. Lately, though, I've noticed some weird things during my camping trips. I feel like someone or something is watching me. I've been feeling this ever since I was young, but it wasn't until more recently when the activity has gotten far more intense. My first clue was that something wasn't right happened about 5 years ago. We went on one of our annual fishing trips in the middle of summertime. My parents had set up tent near some larger rocks, while my brother and dad fished at the pier about 50 feet away from us. They told us girls to stay put, so they can return to help if we got into any trouble. Little did they know, that was a huge mistake on their part. Sitting there alone, my mom was busy reading a book, while my baby brother played with his toys nearby. My eyes were just fixated on this beautiful view of the lake and surrounding forest. I had this terrible feeling of being watched come over me. It wasn't until my mother asked where I was going that it went away. Assuming it was nothing more than paranoia, we stayed put as my dad and brother came back from fishing to spend time with us before dinner had rolled around. Suddenly, just as everything began to settle down, something caught our attention from inside one of those rocky cliffs. We thought it might have been a deer or some other animal, though we focused on it more because we knew something about it wasn't right. It looked like a tall figure. Dark, shaggy fur was coming off of it, almost as if it were wearing clothes. It was huddled up against the cliff wall, its hands clenched to itself, as if it were hiding something to protect itself. As soon as our eyes made contact with it, I couldn't help but squint at what I saw. It stood up tall, looking over us before turning to climb up the rocks towards where the top of the cliff was. My mom and brother freaked out and saw it. The next day came after this, and we tried to forget about it as best we could. I don't think my dad really believed it, so we fished all that afternoon. Everything was going great. After a while, we all got exhausted from having a good day of fishing. I noticed my mom coming towards us, and she was saying she had saw something about 10 feet away, out of the shoreline. My brother saw it too. He kept pointing, wondering what it was. So my older brother, being brave, goes and swims out in the water, over to where this object is kind of waiting in the water. As soon as he started tugging on it, I couldn't see his expression, but it sounded like it turned into something that would haunt him. His eyes became fixed on these 3 fingers that came up out of the water, grabbing him, dark fur pulling him under the surface. It made its way onto land. My brother was screaming as it was trying to drag him into the water. So ear-shattering. I ran away, crying and screaming. The thing disappeared into the lake. After dealing with some local law enforcement and even having EMTs and doctors check us out, we all came to this conclusion. Whatever that creature was had to have been a skinwalker or something. I think it was in the water that day because it was trying to sneak closer to our campsite without us knowing. I'm not sure what to say to people about the legends anymore. Maybe they're real. I went camping with some friends. As any camper should know, you have to be prepared for anything when you go out into the wilderness. You never know what could happen. So that's why on our trip, we brought a lot of the usual things. We had food, water, gear, flashlights, machetes, and an assortment of other useful things. More importantly than all of those was my iPhone. It doesn't hurt to bring your phone. It can come in handy if you get lost or need help, which is exactly what happened. I'm not usually one to believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but this whole thing changed my mind. One night, at around 2 a.m, my friend woke me up. She said that she had heard voices whispering to her outside the tent. Of course, I didn't believe her at first, but she insisted that it was true. So I got up with her to see what it was all about. It wasn't long after that we had left the tent when we both heard some voices nearby. They were whispering and sounded like they were chanting or something of the sort. Super eerie. At first, I thought maybe somebody else on the other campsite nearby had woken up for some reason. We looked around more closely. It seemed that nobody was even awake. And that's when my friend told me that she wanted to try and get closer to the voices. She thought it would be a better idea to go ahead and try to take out her phone and record the sounds, like she had seen in some actual movies. I didn't really want to try and do that. This is a pretty scary real-life situation. I got her phone for her, and we both started walking towards where we had just heard this chanting noise. It definitely was not your average camping experience. Just as we began to get closer, our lights began flickering on and off, and making it harder for us to see anything. And suddenly, the chanting stopped, everything going quiet. We kept walking toward where the sound was, until finally, our flashlights had come back on. There seemed to be some sort of electronical interference, and like the sound was moving all around and we could not make out what was going on. The chanting seemed to be coming from farther and farther away now. It seemed like the sound was moving, from where we were standing. It sounded really close, but when we would take a few steps forward, we could start to see these shadows now moving in the woods, coming towards us. We were scared, so we just decided to head back to the tents and call it a night. We could hear the night growing very quiet, and it sounded like there was a lot of movement all around our tent. We didn't hear much after that, though. The next morning, we quickly decided to move areas altogether. No thanks. That was my camping experience. Maybe not so great, but still interesting nonetheless. This actually happened back when a few friends of mine and I went camping. This wasn't too far outside of Yellowstone National Park, but it was not actually in the park. So we're camping out in the woods, and we're having a pretty good time together. And so at one point, one of the days, it was maybe day 3 or 4, we decided to go exploring in the woods. Because when you're camping, what else better is there to do besides hiking, hanging around, eating good food, and seeing what's around? Now, here's what's scary. We came to a small clearing where there was these saplings that were torn and bent in all sorts of distorted, strange angles. My friend and I discussed what could possibly make these, and we weren't sure. There's other weird markings around the area. Stones that were stacked on top of each other, roughly 7 to 8 feet high. It was very strange. I've heard of people doing rock stacking before as a hobby, but not like this. And there were also branches up on some of these trees that were maybe 6 inches in diameter, fully ripped off at about 9 to 10 feet high. It was disturbing. My friend wasn't really sure what to make of it. Either was I. We kind of figured maybe somebody had come back here at some point and made a fort, but we weren't really quite sure. Then my friend and I started to get this strange feeling. I don't know what it is. It was like this feeling of being really anxious. And my friend noticed it too. And I think we decided maybe it's best we get out of here, just for our own safety. And I couldn't shake the feeling for a while. The clearing wasn't too far away from our own campsite, maybe a half a mile at best. And so the rest of the day, I just kept thinking, what tore those branches off and made those markings on the tree? It didn't make any sense at all to me. So fast forward to that night, and we're having a campfire. We're sitting around joking, just hanging out having a good time. And my buddy starts panicking, swearing that he just saw eye movement off in the distance. And my friend and I are laughing at him, saying, "What do you mean you saw eye movement? What does that even mean?" And he gets really white and says, "There was something big. I don't know. But I saw these eyes reflecting from the light from the fire. Whatever it was watching us, and it was not too far away." So we think he's pretty much pulling our leg, and we don't really buy it too much. We just try and continue on talking and having a good time, and he's still very quiet the rest of that night. So we just ask him, "Is everything okay? Is there anything going on we need to know about?" He just keeps bringing up that same point, that something was there watching us, and he wasn't sure what it was. It really scared him. My friend and I tried to assure him that everything was going to be fine, and who knows? It was probably just a trick of the light, for all we know. I mean, can we really be sure? Well, that night, as we're all lying in our tents, we start to hear something. It sounded like a voice, but it wasn't just any voice. It was a voice that me and my friend distinctly recognized. His mom. His mom had now been dead for about 9 years. She passed away from cancer when he was roughly 14 years old. And so hearing this, my friend and I, the friend's mom, look at each other, and we're thinking to ourselves, are you hearing the same thing I'm hearing? Complete looks of disbelief. We look back over to the friend who was terrified because of the eye shine earlier, and he's actually asleep. So my friend and I look at each other and we look back outside. The voice is now going from muffled to more clear, and it's calling both of our names, saying, "Come here, I want to show you something." Both my friend and I nearly crapped our pants right then and there. It sounded like it was deeper off in the woods. Something or someone was able to imitate his mom's voice. That was more than enough for us. My friend grabbed hold of his knife. I grabbed mine too, and we sat there, huddled, shaking, expecting something to happen. The voice kept taunting us to come into the woods, but after a short amount of time it stopped, and we noticed the night was very, very quiet. Only the sounds of our fire that we still left was barely crackling. Everything else was very quiet. It was so quiet, you can hear the faint leaf falling from the tree. We probably sat there for what felt like hours, just waiting for something to happen, but nothing ever did. I think we eventually fell asleep. The next morning, we decided not to tell our friend, because that would only scare him more. But my other friend, the one whose mom called us, or pretended to be his mother, he mentioned to us, "Hey guys, what do you think about moving our campsite over to somewhere else? Just to be safe, maybe our friend's right. And maybe he really did see eyes shine and we should be fearful." And our friend quickly retorted, "We shouldn't be fearful. We should be cautious and protective. We have no idea what kind of wildlife is out here." This other friend of ours was also part native, and so he really dug into all the folklore legends of stories about Bigfoot and dogmen and skinwalkers and whatever else they really believe in. So he was already open to that sort of realm. My other friend and I, the one we heard the voices, we didn't buy into any of that stuff. Except now, I don't know, we can't be too sure. We moved our campsite after this, not knowing what would happen if we stayed there another night, potentially having a visit from whatever this thing was that faked his mother's voice to try and get us, to try and lure us into the woods. I understand that this will probably sound crazy for those who prefer something a little more normal, but I'm here to tell you that my experience, I feel, is pretty unexplainable, so please bear with me while I share you with something of the unknown. So, a few friends and I got together and decided that we'd go off for a weekend camping trip. Sounds pretty normal already, right? Well, here's what gets weird. We have a camping spot that we generally like to go to. We go there about once every year, sometimes more if we can. It was during this time that as we're getting there, which, by the way, this has never happened before. So we go there, and our GPS decides to randomly start turning us around. Odd, right? Well, the GPS, for whatever reason, could not seem to locate our campsite, and kept rotating us around, over and over. Then it would keep saying connection lost. We weren't really sure what to make of it. My friend even jokingly made the comment, "GPS, go home, you're drunk." That wasn't the end of it. As this is going around, we're getting irritated. We can't quite remember where exactly our campsite is located, but we know it's right around here. At one point or another, one of our friends decides enough is enough. Let's just get out and walk and see where that takes us. And it seems like just as he mentioned that thought, the entire car dies. It must have been an engine failure or some sort of electronic failure, but the entire car just powers down right in that very spot, leaving all of us thinking, what just happened? Now we're all kind of curious, scratching our heads at why on earth his car could have just failed on us. Usually before doing any sort of trips like this, he is always really good about getting the tune-ups to the car. This includes getting the oil changed and anything he may need to make sure his car is running smooth. So now he's pissed. He gets out of the car, pops up the hood, and looks for anything wrong. Everything looks fine. Even the battery is working, but yet when he turns the key in the ignition, it's as if the engine is completely dead. Well, that's great. Now we're stuck here, easily half a mile from our campsite. Now we have to carry everything to get to camp, and hopefully we can get somebody out here to fix our vehicle. Otherwise, we're not getting back home. So we just start pulling out all the stuff in the back of his trunk one by one, getting out the chairs and camping equipment, all the supplies and things we would need for our camping trip. And we start to hear a strange noise come up from ahead. We're not exactly sure what it is, but my friends and I, we all look at each other. Is that a plane? Is there something flying low overhead? We're thinking to ourselves, this doesn't even make any sense. Now we can hear the noises start to get louder and louder. Now we can make out for sure that what we were hearing were helicopters, and many of them. And we look overhead. We counted 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 total black helicopters. They look like military choppers, and they look like they were on a mission somewhere, and they were definitely going pretty fast. All of us were thinking, what's going on? That's weird. My friend mentioned that maybe there's a military base nearby or something. After that, we all started to get this sort of strange static feeling in the air. It felt like everything was charged with electricity. Very hard to describe. It was very unsettling feeling. Kind of like this anxious, something's going to happen at any given moment kind of feeling. But we tried to suppress it and ignore it the best we could, deciding to continue on with where we were going to go, our camping spot. So we had everything in our hands, and we're kind of dragging it slowly across the field to get to where we can go. So we have everything bundled in our arms, trying to make haste and get to our spot. We still had a ways to go though, so this wasn't going to be the best adventure ever. More like pretty painful. I was certainly not excited about having to drag a 20-pound tent over 1.5 miles away from our camp. It was further away than what we had thought. We all agreed that that was a very good idea. So we go and wait by the car while he goes out and scouts where this supposed campsite is supposed to be. The same one we've all been to multiple times. But something I noticed right away as well. The area in which the car broke down was not familiar. Even though we've been here many times, this road or section of forest looked different. Granted, we were still 1 mile plus away from the campsite, so there's probably a good reason for that, but it just didn't seem right. Maybe we did get turned around somewhere and we were in a wrong area. I don't know. I think we sat around waiting for maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes, wondering how long it's going to take him to get there and find our camp. When we see him running back to us, incredibly frightened, he was obviously spooked by something. He runs to us and he's totally out of breath, and now we're scared because something just happened to him. So we kind of joke around and say, "What's wrong, Roger? Did a bear chase you and try to eat you?" And he keeps trying to tell us, "No, guys, something happened." And we're laughing, saying, "What do you mean something happened? We gotta leave now." And he kept running to the car, jumping in and putting his key into the ignition, trying desperately to get us to start. We saw how crazy he was acting, and so we're saying, "Dude, what's going on? You're acting really weird. What did you see? What happened?" But he wouldn't respond. He immediately tried to grab at one of our phones, and none of us had cell service. I didn't know what we were going to do, or how we were going to get out of this pickle. It was already becoming late afternoon. We would not have daylight for very much longer. When we finally got him calmed down enough, he explained to us there was something large that chased him, and that he doesn't think this is the area where our campsite is at, that things look different. He told us he kept getting turned around for hours. We kind of smirked and told him, "Well, that's impossible. You were only gone for less than 20 minutes. But he says, "No, it was at least 3 or 4 hours. So we got into an argument about the time and tried to explain to him, "Look, you left at 4:32. It's only just now 4:48. You were hardly gone that long." And he kind of looked at the clock and was sort of shocked. He gets out of the car and we're talking more and we're trying to find out what exactly happened, because he's just acting so crazy. And randomly, the key is not even in the ignition, mind you, the car just all of a sudden turns on. And all of our attention turns into cheering and getting excited. My friend just says, "Look, we need to get out of here now. Forget the camping trip. Let's go home." He doesn't really want to explain himself further. So I think we all just kind of shrug our shoulders, and while we're concerned, we just put up with it. So we throw all of our stuff in the back, jump in the car. My friend puts the key into the ignition, and somehow the car just magically had turned on without the key, so we're not really sure what to equate that to. And as we're driving away, my friend is very tense. He's very, very tense. And we're asking him all these questions. What happened out there? What's this all about? Does any of this have anything to do with the fact that you seem to have lost time, or that your car randomly turned off and turned back on by itself without a key? But he wouldn't answer. He just wouldn't answer. This has been an experience I really don't know how to quite wrap my brain around. Like I said, it doesn't quite fit into the realm of normalcy. It sounds like some crazy made-up story, but I don't know, even my friend now still won't talk about it. It's traumatizing for him. You can just tell every time it's brought up, the look on his face is just panic and anxiety. Something happened to him out there. He saw something. What? I'm not so sure. And I don't even know if I want to know. So this was back in 2015 when me and a good friend of mine decided to go camping in their backyard. They live up in the mountains, so their backyard is pretty much the wilderness that leads up to the mountains, even higher up. The night started off just great. We did not have his parents bugging us, and we can pretty much just have the time of our lives. We bought a bunch of soda, chips, and all the good junk food for an essential camping trip. We even had our comic books too. We were full on ready to go. After setting up camp, we climbed into our tent, talking about how exciting it was being out here in the wilderness, or so we pretended, because it was actually just his backyard, as I already said. That didn't matter to us boys though. We had a blast, although it wasn't until later on in the night that things would actually turn awry. I want to say it was closer to 11 p.m. where my friend and I both got pretty tired, and we decided that we had had enough pop, junk food, and comic books for the night. We decided to turn off our little makeshift LED lantern and say goodnight to each other. We climbed up into our sleeping bags and tried to get some shut-eye. I wake up at some point in the middle of the night. I couldn't tell you exactly when or what time, but the first thing that wakes me up is what sounds like heavy movement right outside the tent, and so me being still half asleep, just assume it's my friend's father, possibly checking up on us to make sure we're okay. But then I kind of roll over and open my eyes. I notice my friend's gone. Well, that's weird. So I sit up in the sleeping bag and I call out to him. I don't hear anything. Now I'm beginning to get worried, and the movement is sounding much closer to the tent now. I kind of just lay there gripping my sleeping bag, hoping that whatever it is does not come in our tent. I was never one who believed in monsters, and it didn't sound like a monster. It sounded like somebody really heavy walking around. But whoever they were circled around the tent, maybe by 10 or 20 feet, multiple times before just stopping and standing still. I had no idea where my friend was, and for all I know, it was his dad trying to play a prank on us outside. I was trying to calm myself by just telling myself, okay, he probably just went inside to use the bathroom. There's got to be a logical reason why he's not in the tent right now. And then I hear the footsteps kind of wander away. Quickly, actually. And maybe about a minute or two afterwards, I hear footsteps and I hear the door, the back door to the house, and running. That's when I kind of tighten my sleeping bag, and it's my friend. He's unzipping the tent and climbs back in, and in my half sleep, and I kind of scold him. Where were you? What happened? He just explains that he thinks he ate too much junk food, and it kind of gave him a bad case of the runs, so he had to go use the bathroom. Sorry. He was hoping he didn't wake me up. I told him it was fine, he didn't wake me up. I had thought I heard something outside of her tent, and he tells me he didn't see anything. I asked him, was it your dad? No, he's been asleep the whole time. I told him I'm a little worried. I heard somebody, clearly somebody, standing outside of her tent and circling, and it wasn't just a big animal. It was somebody who was walking around, judging by the way they were stepping. I think my friend just played it off. There's nobody out here, so I don't think you gotta worry. I will say this, I was not hallucinating it, I did not dream it, it was not a nightmare. I did not make this up. The sounds are what pulled me out of a deeper sleep. Something or someone was standing outside of our tent that night, and I almost wonder if my friend coming out of the house, coming back to the tent, scared them off. Was it somebody who was curious? Did somebody jump the fence and want into our tent? My friend doesn't really have any neighbors out here, so I don't know who would be coming up to his lawn this late at night. But sometimes, it's experiences like this that really make you wonder. My story begins when I just turned 20. A few close friends of mine, including my brother, went camping for about 6 days out in the Pisgah National Forest. The first night was uneventful, just telling ghost stories around the campfire. The second day, we hiked to the top of one of the hills surrounding our campsite and noticed 2 rocks stacked on top of one another about 10 feet away from where we stood. We all noticed there were weird markings carved into them, but decided to leave them alone for now, thinking it might be some sort of tribal land marking or something like that. So we went back down to our own campsite. The third day, my brother and I hiked out towards those stones again to try and figure out what they meant by examining them closer. When we got there, both stones had fallen over. We were all spooked and left where they lay. We felt a strange energy surrounding them. Now, my friend Tyler, who is a hunter, noticed that there was an old game trail out behind our campsite leading to this area of the stones, so we decided to explore it. It's clearly been walked through. About 15 or so feet in, we found this huge hole that had a couple of bones in it. It looked like an old deer carcass. Not sure what that was used. Possibly a trap hole, but we're not sure. The fourth day, my brother and I hiked back towards those stones yet again, and when we got there, the stones had been stacked up yet again, each one perfectly as they were the first day. There's nobody else out here, so how this could be done, we weren't sure. We moved them to see if there was any reason why they were stacked or if they were put together somehow, but they weren't. They would not even knock over. It was really creepy. That same night around 3 in the morning, I had woken up to use the restroom. When I turned my lights on, my friend Tyler was standing outside our tent, looking like he had seen a ghost, pale white and trembling with fear. He said something had woke him up out of his sleep. He claimed there was this energy standing over him, holding him down as if something was trying to fight him, push him down, or he'd forget everything. I didn't believe his story, but he showed me the scratches and tears all over his chest, right below his neckline. It looked like fingernails were digging into his skin, as if somebody was holding on to him. The very next morning, my brother asked Tyler why he took off running in the middle of the night, and he wouldn't answer any questions. He began to open up a little more as he got more comfortable. He felt as if there was this evil, malevolent figure that would stay in his tent. We weren't really sure what to make of it, so we figured we'd go and check out those stones again. I know what you're thinking. It's probably weird we kept going back, but there was this force, mind you, that kept drawing us to these stones. I don't know what it was. It's like we just couldn't get enough. We had to keep coming back and checking on them. I don't know how to describe it. The next morning after breakfast, my brother and I again hiked out towards these stones, and they were stacked in a completely different way. Someone or something was out here doing this. We weren't sure who or what, but we had to get to the bottom. That night, you could feel a strange presence all over the campsite. I'm not really sure how else to describe that, but it just felt like there were multiple people all around. You wake up, and there's just this bad energy looming all around the campsite. Even my friends picked up on it. So I called out to Tyler. He responded back. I asked him, "Do you feel that?" He said that's him. And I asked him, "What do you mean him?" "It's the demon that controls the stones. The same one that's been in my tent every night that's been clawing me and choking me. He's here in this camp, and he's angry we're here. He doesn't want us here." And my first thoughts were Tyler was totally pranking us, but this is weird. Tyler's a pretty quiet kid, and for him to say this stuff, I'm thinking, okay, he's definitely either possessed or something is going on. So I get out of my tent to check on him, and he's all wide-eyed, more scratches all over his arms, and he's looking completely wigged out. And Tyler looks at me and just says he wants us to go to the stones. Gets up out of his tent, grabs a flashlight, and walks off down the trail to where the stones are. This is in the middle of the night, mind you. Everybody else is asleep. And so I'm yelling to him, "Tyler, what are you doing?" And he just walks off. I could have ran after him, but I figured I would just let him come back, since he clearly knew where he was going. I walked back to my tent, expecting him to come back any couple minutes, but I think I eventually fell asleep. When I awoke in the morning, I got up, and my brother seemed worried. "Hey, where's Tyler at?" I looked around and I told him, "I don't know. Is he not here?" My brother just shook his head. "Oh no, I hope he's not at the stones." My brother was confused and looked at me. "What do you mean at the stones?" And I told him about what had happened last night. He too was weirded out, so we both got up and walked down to where the stones were. And there Tyler was, sitting there, cross-legged, looking very strange. He had this creepy smile on his face, just staring off in the middle of nowhere. "Tyler, are you okay?" His smile never broke. I don't even think the man blinked. If anybody was possessed, this was it. He did not respond to us. He did not say anything. It took me physically grabbing his arm, pulling him up from a sitting spot to get him to move. And we had to physically move him back to camp. And as soon as we got back, Tyler began saying some really weird stuff. The stones want us. The stones want us back. And so that was more than enough for me and my brother. This was turning into a little mini horror movie, and I was not going to be a part of it. We took everything we had there, including Tyler, dragging him back to civilization. But even when we got back to the real world, Tyler's personality seemed to be different. He was much more quiet. He's normally a pretty reserved person, but much more than usual. He would just say weird things and do weird stuff. Things completely out of character. After a while, we lost contact with him. I almost wonder if he was truly possessed, since I've heard stories of people who are possessed. Well, their personalities change and they become a different person. That's pretty much almost down to the T of what happened to Tyler that night. Is it possible that this demon of the stones somehow possessed him? I can't answer that. But I can say from experience, he definitely changed and was not the same Tyler we went camping with. This was the weekend of 4th of July. My girlfriend and I were out camping at a campground, whose name I won't mention. It had gotten pretty quiet. Everybody else had gone to bed. It was not quite July 4th yet, so we were sitting up on the hood of my truck, wrapped up in a blanket, cuddling, watching the stars. And my girlfriend is pointing out to me all the different stars. And of course, just like in any typical romance situation, there's a couple of shooting stars, which we thought was cool. My girlfriend is actually a pretty big science buff, so this was more enjoyable for her than it was for me. As we're watching the stars, there was one star that appeared in the sky that we thought was a shooting star, but this one was different. The way it moved was different. It didn't shoot across the sky like a typical shooting star. It was also much lower. My girlfriend pointed it out to me at first and said, "Whoa, look at that star." And we kind of watched it as it slowly glided across the sky before stopping. I asked her, "Is that an airplane? What is that?" And she told me no, it's way too high up in elevation, and the lights didn't match up with an airplane. This was distinctly a star, but it was moving very, very slowly, not the way a meteor would. And then all of a sudden, it just vanished. Then, as soon as it vanished, we started hearing these strange electrical noises all around us, enough to make my girlfriend sit up from where she was sitting. She began looking around, saying, "Are you kidding me? What is that? What are we hearing?" I told her, "I don't know. It sounds strange. What do you think it could be?" It sounded like a strange electronical interference, or something along those lines, like a radio signal that had lost path, like a radio wave or something that had lost signal, perhaps. The noise seemed to be coming from all around us. We could not pinpoint a specific location, but it was really starting to bother us. It was growing increasingly loud. Then we started to feel some strange vibrations all around us, almost as if there was a mini earthquake, but there was no earthquake. My girlfriend kept asking me, "Are you feeling what I'm feeling? Am I just going crazy? What's going on?" It was getting to a point where things were getting a little too strange for my liking, and now things weren't feeling so comfortable after all. The noises and the sounds began to sound more mechanical and closer by, like there was heavy construction machinery and equipment being ran in the nearby woods, but that's impossible. It was nearly 12:30 at night, and there were only campgrounds around here. So what would explain it? While my girlfriend and I, a little bit unnerved, were more perplexed and curious about all of it, we weren't sure what to make of it. We decided to just call it a night and climb into our tents. The next morning, a few campers came over and asked us, "Hey, did you guys hear those weird sounds last night?" And we told them, "Yeah, we did. What did you guys hear?" And they explained the same thing. We told them that we were watching shooting stars and that we saw this one slowly drift across the sky, stop. And as soon as that happened, and it disappeared, all these weird noises began. Now, this one camper we talked to went off about aliens and UFOs and a secret underground base. My girlfriend and I listened to what he had to say, but we don't believe in that stuff. We take more of a skeptical, open-minded approach, and we think that there might be an actual, reasonable, logical explanation for all the noises we heard. Perhaps there's underground construction, and perhaps seeing this star disappear when it did, and these noises began, is just mere coincidence. However, Reddit, I would love to hear your opinion. Did we really maybe hear or encounter UFOs or aliens? Or is this simply just a coincidence? Camping has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. But on this particular night, it had turned into one of the most terrifying. I'm not sure how to explain it, but for some reason, I felt like whatever was approaching my tent that night wasn't something you'd want to meet in a dark forest late at night. My mind instantly went to dogman, and from what little I could remember about cryptozoology. My camping spot was at the top of a cliff overlooking a small forest. Apparently, there had been quite a few UFO sightings here over the years. There were also several abandoned houses amidst the trees. At least 3 of them had seemed to have been burned down due to suspicious circumstances. The way up or down the cliff was a very long, steep dirt path. I had heard my dogs barking coming from the direction of the houses, so I got up to see what they were barking at. I couldn't see anything in that direction, but then something got my attention down by one of the abandoned houses. It looked like some sort of dark mass moving around near the house. I decided to move closer in. I discovered it was extremely hard to see. If there had not been just enough light for me to make out its shape against the shadowed background, I would have never seen it at all. My mind instantly went to all those UFO encounters over the years and how maybe these dogmen and things were behind most of them. I'm pretty sure that's what my dogs had been going crazy at. So I pulled out my phone and tried to snap some pictures, but all that showed up was blackness. The light down there must have been too dim, but even then, it looked fine on my phone. I walked away from there, leaving it as is, not wanting to mess with whatever this thing was, and try and just continue on with my trip. Now, later on that night, after I'd gone to bed, I mysteriously woke up randomly at about 1 in the morning. I don't know why. It's as if my body just decided, hey, it's time to be awake. So I thought, what better time than to go use the bathroom? Maybe that'll relax my body. So, after getting up, I look out, and near us is a large cornfield near the campsite. That's when I see this shape. I call it him. It's hard to describe him because he was covered in long, dark black hair, and his head was very dog-like, and pointed ears and broad shoulders, similar to what you might expect on an old bear dog. The fur around his neck was longer than the rest of him, and it hung down kind of like a mane. I remained motionless for some time after seeing him, too scared to even blink. He didn't seem to pay much attention to me. Instead, he was going through the corn to get to the other side of the field and off into the tree line. At that point, I decided to ex-nay on the going to the bathroom and go back to my tent. The next morning, I woke up, I felt much better, and didn't see any signs that this wolf man had visited anywhere around my campsite. I wasn't going to be taking any chances. Sure, I never had an actual nightly visit from this thing, but I wasn't going to stick around for another night in case he did want to come back and was curious. As a teenager, me and a few friends of ours were playing capture the flag in our campground. It was now beginning to get dark, and we were all getting tired, so we made our way back to my friend's camper. His dad was a really heavy smoker, so we did not want to go inside. It reeked of cigarettes. So we figured we would just sit around the campfire, eating hot dogs, s'mores, telling stories, and making jokes. A typical teenage boy behavior. But my friend pointed out something strange. About 30 feet away from us, near the woods by another camper. The environment wasn't that well lit at all, so excuse us, but it was a figure standing there. My friend pointed it out to me. He said, "Hey, look at that guy up there. He's kind of strange looking. I mean, why is he just standing there looking in our direction?" And I look, and my other friends look, and it's very weird. It appeared to be this very tall man, with what maybe was ears on top of its head that were very pointed, and he was just standing right next to a large oak tree that was just out of reach of the light of a camper that was right there. We assumed at first that maybe it was the man who lived in that camper, or was camping in it, and was just standing there. But he was kind of looking off in our direction. Not directly at us, but in our direction. We were all thinking, why does he have pointed ears? Maybe he's wearing a mask, but it's nowhere near Halloween. The rest of us began to grow very curious at what we were seeing. It didn't make sense, what we were looking at. Why would this man just be standing there by a tree staring at us? Until it moved and turned its head sideways to look in the other direction. That's when a few of us gasped and one of us screamed. The silhouette of the shape was that of a large wolf head once it turned to its side, while the body stayed still, holding onto the large oak tree that was right near the camper, with a few of my friends saying, "Dude, is that a werewolf?" And of course, we're being 14, 15, and 16, there's no way werewolves exist. That just doesn't make sense. But either does what we're looking at. Sure, you could look at the possibility that this was maybe somebody in a costume, but the reasons behind it didn't make sense. It was nowhere close to Halloween. This person was very tall. Now, my friend's father was 6'4", and this person was easily 7 to 8 feet tall, maybe a little taller. Not very broad, like a football player, but still very lean. We couldn't really see the legs, but even the proportions of the body just seemed off for a human to be in a costume, not to mention the size of its head. Either this was actually a real living animal, or we were looking at somebody in a very elaborate, high-priced Halloween costume from Hollywood. And I don't think it was the latter. So now we're all kind of huddled together watching this sight, and it's staying pretty still. Some of us are kind of nervous to make any noise. We don't want to attract his or their attention. Some of us by this point are calling it an it and not him. And so we're watching this for a couple of moments, and somebody nearby, I don't know how far away, probably quite a few campsites down, revs up their truck. And this must have spooked it or him or what, because the second that engine revved up really loudly, this wolf instantly, gone into the trees. It was so fast, it was like a blur. And all of us are pretty much there with our mouths open. Did you just see that? There's no way that was a person. No human, I don't care if you're in the Olympics or what, can move that fast. It was impossible. And as you can imagine, we could not stop talking about it for the rest of the night. Even later on, when my friend's dad came out, he asked us, "Hey boys, what are you guys getting so excited about?" We decided not to tell him because he probably wouldn't believe us. We weren't really scared, but it was a very interesting sighting for sure. As far as what we saw, well, I don't normally believe in ghosts or Bigfoot, but this might have been something from something we don't understand. And I'll never know for sure when I look back on this memory. Before I start my story, let me just say that I do have experience with the outdoors, camping, hiking, and all that nature stuff. I am aware of bears, how they kill, how they live, how they move, and judging by this experience, I'm pretty sure this was not a bear. Let me get to my story. So, we were up in Colorado. It was the fall time, and the morning is very chilly. So, I was up fairly early, splitting a lot of firewood, getting ready to have a nice warm campfire to cook breakfast on, have a nice hot coffee, etc. I split about a quarter cord or so and threw it in the back of my pickup. I wasn't ready to go back to camp yet, so I decided to try out my new chainsaw on some downed trees where I was working. I did this for about 2 or 3 hours, cutting up anything small enough for me to cut into pieces that would easily fit into the fire ring. It wasn't easy work, but I split wood full time, so I'm pretty efficient at it, and fast. This is why I was able to split up a quarter cord of wood so quickly. Plus, it's an amazing workout if you ever do it. So I get back to camp, get a fire going, and already, my friend Jason and his wife in the tent can smell the coffee brewing. He asked if he could have some, and so of course I told him yes. We sat around the fire that morning, drinking coffee, laughing, talking, and eating an amazing breakfast. This was near Boulder, Colorado, by the way. Very high up in elevation. You could see for miles anywhere on the mountain, or so where we were camped at. It was very nice country. Mountains as far as you could see. Plenty of smaller trees and scrub brush and meadow grass everywhere. The sun was shining brightly through the pines, and the birds chirping loudly to our enjoyment of nature's beauty. Fall is glorious, especially in Colorado. We all decided that we'd go on a hike after breakfast. So, after finishing, we prepped out with waters, canteens, everything we would need, and began to pace ourselves on trails around. Now, this is where the story really starts to take a turn. We usually don't follow trails all too much. We like to go off-trailing. That's the only real way you're going to see the backcountry, as I like to say. So, we started doing just this. It became about 2 in the afternoon. We were probably about 3 to 4 miles off trail at this point, and yes, we were not going to get lost. We knew basically where we were going. But here's where things got very strange. We found a carcass. This was a large bull elk that had just recently died. The blood was even still fresh and not even fully coagulated yet. But it wasn't the fact that we found a large bull elk dead was the issue. It was the manner in which how it was killed. That's what disturbed all of us. The head was completely ripped off the body, setting on a stump, probably about 25 to 30 feet away from the body. On the body, the front legs were broken backwards, and the entire abdomen was ripped open. Not cut, with cutting tools, the way any hunter would when he's dressing it. This looked like something large punched a hole in the abdomen, and a huge pile of guts were laying about another 20 feet, south downhill of this body, sitting there. Its left back leg was entirely ripped off. It looked the same way as if you had ripped a chicken leg off a chicken body. The flesh and meat was clearly torn. The back leg was nowhere to be found. And the right back leg was also bent backwards, broken. Something, I don't know what, had mangled and torn this bull elk all to pieces. Now, I don't know about you, but before you sit there and write this off as, oh, well, that was just a bear. Bears don't kill like this. Bears also eat what they kill, and whatever killed this did not eat on it. In fact, we all looked over the body. There were no bite marks, no scratch marks. Nothing that we could see had attempted to try and eat this. From the way it looked as if something had come up to this bull elk, give it a headlock, and tore its head completely off its body, and set the head nicely on a stump nearby, then proceed to rip the back left leg off its body, and then punch a hole into its abdomen, rip it open, and tearing out all the guts. As I just said, the kill looked relatively fresh. I'd say no older than 12 hours at most. The blood had not even coagulated yet. Or if it had, it was just starting to. For whatever reason, none of us thought to take a picture. But I think it's because we were so deeply freaked out. And this wasn't deep in the forest. This was in a small meadow. A pretty large open clearing with a few trees and a couple of stumps here and there. The stump that this elk head was placed on was from an old fallen tree. Something deliberately set it there after ripping the head off. Now you tell me, What animal in the wilderness of Colorado has that kind of power, that kind of intelligence, and kills in this manner? What we saw matches up with nothing the way a deer eats or kills. This was also about 4 to 5 miles off trail, so pretty deep in the woods, I guess you can say, or on the mountainside. We didn't really go investigating any further after that. I think that was more than enough, so we headed back to the trail after that, and we could not stop talking about it. I wouldn't say we all got a bad feeling, but it was definitely disturbing to see an animal killed that way, something I'd never seen until that afternoon. I wish I could tell you that we had a pretty crazy eventful camping trip after that, but it was pretty normal, with that being the only thing that really stuck out to all of us. It still stands out to me this day as the craziest camping adventure I've ever been on. All in Colorado, of course. There's something out in the mountains out there, killing elk. What it's doing with them, I'll never know. I was in the Boy Scouts when I was about 10 years old. I probably spent a good 2-3 years, from what I can remember. This memory, it takes us back to Pennsylvania, when we were camping out for about 2 weeks. Now, I can't remember the exact location, because I was 10, and we went to a lot of different places, but this campground, or wherever we were at, had a really fun river that we'd play out all the time. If I remember, it was about 3 to 4 feet deep, but don't judge me on that too much. My memory is a little cloudy when it comes to very in-depth specifics. Anyway, me and a few other scouts decided to go swimming. While we were there, I would keep looking over the riverbank, expecting to see something. You know that feeling you get when you feel like you're being watched? Well, that's kind of like what it was, but every time I would turn over my shoulder, there was never anything there. At one point, I just decided to ignore the feelings altogether and continue to swim or play or do whatever it is I was doing at 10. Afterwards, we got out, probably about 2 hours later. My friend was mentioning to me, "Hey, did you see that deer watching us? Wasn't that weird?" And I looked at him and told him, "What do you mean, deer? I thought I saw something watching us, but every time I would turn around, nothing was there." And his eyes just kind of got wide. "You felt it too, huh?" And then he started telling me, "Yeah, there was this large deer up by the trees. It was kind of watching us, and it was standing up. I've never seen a deer stand up on 2 legs before and watch us, but then it disappeared." I don't know why, but after he told me that, I got the creeps. Like, I just felt really eerie all over. Never asked around if anybody else ever saw the same thing, and the rest of that camping trip turned pretty uneventful. But I guess that spot is not too far away from one of the several native reservations in Pennsylvania. Or so I'm told. I almost wonder if there's any connection between that and what we saw. I mean, I hear people talk about skinwalkers and strange Native American creatures. Maybe there's a connection. Maybe there isn't. Maybe this kid and I just happened to catch a rare species of upright standing deer. Probably not likely. But it was still very, very creepy. This was back in 1979, while on a church retreat, or what you would call a church camp, out in one of the national forests in northern Minnesota. This wasn't my own church. I was there with the Baptist church of about 45 people of all ages. Our camp was in a very remote location in the back of Beyond. It was only accessible by 4-wheel drive vehicles or snowmobiles during winter. The group I went was split up into 3 separate campsites. In total, there were around 15 people at my site, which consisted of a couple of tents and a fire pit that we had dug out to use for cooking, for warmth, or for cool night air. Our campfire died down pretty low before everybody decided it was time for sleep. Everybody in our respective tents went to sleep quickly. We were all tired from the daily activities, mostly the usual team-building stuff you do at church retreats. All but me laid down inside their tents. I was the youngest, so I got to sleep in a tent with my mom and 3 other church members, who were all older women. I recall falling asleep quickly that night too. I suddenly woke up to what sounded like some sort of large animal growling right outside. I woke up immediately, while lying down and still inside the sleeping bag. I remember looking around and everybody else was still very fast asleep, except for those who were on watch. They were sitting around the fire pit, I think some of the older beacons of the church, directly across from where we laid our tents. Not sure how long it took me to fall back asleep, but I remember I heard another one, and it was very loud. This time, I remember sitting up in my sleeping bag and peering out through the tent's entrance. The fire was pretty big, and our campfire emitted a great amount of light. I quickly turned back around to see if anybody else had heard what I had just heard, or was this all in my head? I saw a couple of the older beacons go in checking out the noise from the area in which the sound came from. I knew bears and stuff were out here, but I didn't think they roared like this. After seeing them walk away, I decided to go lay back down in my sleeping bag, thinking the situation will solve itself. Or something along those lines. Whatever an 8-year-old thinks. As I'm lying down, I can hear footsteps approaching our tent very quickly. And so naturally, I sit up and respond. Immediately, our tent flap opens, and it's one of the beacons who went and investigated the noise. He's as pale as a sheet and tells us, "Ladies, we all need to stay in our tents right now. There is an issue on camp. Just stay in your tents until it's safe." Only a couple of the women, including my mother, woke up to even respond to him. "What do you mean issue?" they had asked him. "We're not exactly sure ourselves, but for the time being, and for the sake of everybody's safety, we're just going to make sure that nobody goes out. If you need a bathroom break, be sure to let one of us know." After that, nothing else was said. He zipped up the tent, and I tried to roll back over and go to sleep, which I eventually did do. I woke up to my mom shaking me in the early morning. It was time to get up and start our day. That day proceeded as normal, but I do remember many of the older church members having very concerned expressions on their face and almost seemingly worried about something. What? I'm not sure. A lot of times they would talk amongst themselves in hushed tones and whispers, while sometimes glancing over at the smaller children, basically me and a bunch of other kids. At this point, I knew something was going on, but nobody would tell me. That night, all of us youngsters, 12 and under, were sent into our tents to retire for the evening. It was only 7 p.m., and in the summertime, it's still bright outside. I remember asking my mom, "What gives? Why do we have to go to bed so early?" And she just explained to me, "The adults have a special task to do tonight, and we need to be up while you kids go get some sleep to be up early in the morning." She smiled, patted me, gave me a kiss, and sent me off to bed in the tent. I lay there awake, in my very own tent this night, because I was the only one occupying it, while all the other adults sat around and talked very quietly. There was no laughter. There was no cheerful talking. No upbeat attitudes, no smiling, no having a good time. It was as if something was going on that we weren't allowed to know. I remember that night specifically was a really long, restless night. While I didn't hear any roars or anything weird like that like the other night, it was still very uncomfortable, not having the comfort of my mom with me in the tent or just the company of others. I didn't like being so isolated and alone, and I had no idea what was going on. The next morning, my mom wakes me up the same way as she did the day before, shaking me awake, telling me, "Honey, we gotta get all of our stuff. Camp's being canceled early. The pastor running it is sick." This is pretty much all she told me. At 8 years old, I didn't think to prod for more information or ask other questions, so being that age, you'd kind of just go along with whatever's going on. And I remember all of us packing up and leaving. But what's weird is I don't think we were more than 5 days into the church retreat, and it was supposed to go for 2 or 3 weeks. This was one of the many retreats we have done, and not the first. Also, I think the first one that we had closed down early, if I remember right. It really makes me sit back and wonder, why did they close the retreat early? What was the roaring from the other night? What did they see? What did the adults, elders, and beacons know that us kids didn't know? Those answers I never found out, unfortunately. Even as I got older, and I would bring up this event, my mom would still not speak about it. I don't know if she knew or how much she knew or what she was told, but she seemed uncomfortable talking about the subject and would either quickly change the subject or just not answer any questions I had at all. My mom unfortunately passed away at 17 due to breast cancer. I still never got answers. My mother passed away from breast cancer in 1988. I'm now 51, and I still never got the answers I needed. But I can tell you now, as an adult myself, there was something going on out there. Something fishy. Something they did not want the kids to know about. And with all these stories coming out now about dogmen and bigfoot and all these creepy creatures and cryptids, I have a hunch that somebody saw something and alerted the others. And for our own sake, the children's sake, they did their best to protect them, figuring it would be best to cancel the retreat and fear that this creature would attack somebody. Although it's speculated, there's nothing else out there that would make sense. We were not actually camping yet, but hiking. This was in 2005. Our family and I were hiking up in the Sierra Nevadas of California. We were heading up to a place that I can't remember the name of, but it was out in the desolate wilderness, on a road not too far away from a main road. I had a sighting of something that I don't know how to explain exactly, so I'll try my best to accurately depict it as much as my memory will allow me. It, I remember, was up in a tree, probably about 60 feet up. From far away, I thought it was an exceptionally large owl, but owls don't stare like what I saw did. And the closer I got, it looked to be more like a small human crouched down on all fours, holding onto this branch, staring at us. My first thoughts, and even pointing this out to my girlfriend, was, did somebody put some sort of stupid Halloween prop up in this tree? But then I saw its body and head move, and so that immediately threw that notion out the window. Due to the lighting and shading, I couldn't make out exact details, but I could see the overall figure, and the way this thing moved and shifted. It moved very robotically and stiff, and it was watching us very closely. I could see from even that distance that it had very large eyes, and it was just dark. I couldn't tell if it had hair or not, or how big it was, but just that it looked like a person holding onto the branch, crouched down. We were walking perpendicular to where this thing was, or a little ways off, so we'd end up walking closer to it. The closer we got to it, it actually ended up jumping from branch to branch the same way a monkey does, that same quick, very agile movement, while maintaining a stiff, rigid form, if that makes any sense. And while it moved like that, this certainly wasn't any monkey. There are no monkeys or primates that are native to California, at least that I'm aware of. And from what I saw, this thing did not have a tail. It was not swinging on the branches like an ape does. It simply just darted off from branch to branch to branch until it vanished. Me and my girlfriend were the only one that saw it. Not that it was that out of the way, but I just don't think that if you weren't looking for it, you weren't going to see it. And the only reason I saw it is I just happened to glance up in that area and see something out of place. And the closer we got to it, the more it appeared to be very out of place. And then, as we began getting closer, that's when I think it noticed us and started really moving away from us. So, can I sit here and tell you back what I saw 16 years ago? No, because frankly, I don't know. But I can tell you this, that it was weird, and I haven't seen anything like it since I've gone hiking up in the Sierra Nevadas, or anywhere in California for that matter. My girlfriend even doesn't know what to make of it. She thought it was really weird too. We didn't tell any more of our family, and we certainly didn't talk about it too much more. But we'll still bring it up every now and then, just because the memory is just so strange. When I was younger, I remember me, my brother, and my older sister would all go and spend a few weeks at my uncle's cabin. He lived off in the Gifford Pinchot National Forest, which, if you're not familiar with the Pacific Northwest, it is in the state of Washington, surrounding the Mount St. Helens area. Again, if you're not familiar with Mount St. Helens, it was the infamous volcanic eruption that shook the world in 1980. Now, the Gifford Pinchot is a beautiful forest, known for all sorts of spelunking adventures, caving, tunnels and caverns formed in eons old cooling lava. There's even the infamous ape caves, which is a very popular tourist attraction. And of course, a tourist hotspot, the Pacific Crest Trail. But that's not all. The Gifford Pinchot is not only a very thick, dense forest, but is also home to many things like rivers, lakes, lots of fishing, lots of trout, coho and chinook salmon. There's also things like mountain goats, bobcats, black bear, elk, and plentiful amounts of deer. There's even been a handful of Sasquatch sightings all around. So as you can see, the Gifford Pinchot is quite the place, which made for a beautiful childhood growing up, spending a few weeks out in it at my uncle's house just about every June, as the forest is lush and thick with overgrowth, as it is always at the end of spring. My uncle lived pretty remotely, but he wasn't a mountain man. I guess, kind of. But he still bought food, had electricity, all that stuff. He just lived very remotely. My brother, my sister, and I would always go out and play in the woods. It was very cathartic for us as kids. And even thinking back to it is just nostalgia after nostalgia. Luckily, where my uncle's cabin was at, there wasn't a whole lot of yuppies or tourists. He had a lot of trails, actually, the game trails included, and we would always walk on them. Now, we didn't walk on them too much, but there was one main trail that led from the back of my uncle's cabin deep into the woods. And I don't think we ever reached the end of it, because it went several miles deep, and I think at one point or another, either connected to a river, a lake, or maybe one of the more popular trails. I don't remember. I would have to ask him. This was many, many years ago. But for this trail in particular, he always told us, and was very adamant in his warning, that we are to never go off this trail. We never understood why until one day. When we would ask, he would just tell us there's dangers that lie ahead, and we have to be careful. So one day, my brother, my sister, and I decided to go out on the same trail, just to see how far we can make it before turning around. We get maybe 2-3 miles. Of course, I'm guessing, because at that age, I didn't really know how to gauge distance at all, so it's just a wild guess. But we had spent a few hours walking in one direction before turning around. And my sister, being the oldest, gets the bright idea. Listen, I know our uncle said to not veer off the path, but what could he have meant by dangerous? Maybe we should see. And me and my younger brother were very impressionable, so we thought it was a good idea too. And we veer off the path completely, going down into the thicket. We spend maybe about 30 minutes down and we get to some blackberry bramble. Remember that in June, the blackberries are not ripe yet. That's not till about August. So at this point, there are all those red little premature blackberries that you can't eat. So we're trying to be really careful about where we're going. And out of nowhere, my sister stops us, shushes us, and tells us to listen. We can hear a voice calling us, calling all of our names. And she looks at me very intently. I'll never forget her face. Do you hear that? I remember telling her, yeah. And I looked over at my brother. He was petrified. The voice was of our uncle's, except instead of back the way we came, where it should be coming from, it was the way we were going, which was deeper into the forest. And another thing, it sounded like him, but it did not sound exactly like him. I don't know how to describe it, it was just different. Like maybe somebody trying to imitate him. And it was calling all of our names, asking us to come here. You could tell it wasn't too far away. But this instantly creeped me, my brother, and my sister out. And my sister was the first one to mention it. We need to go back, guys. I just have a really bad feeling. We weren't one to argue. We quickly turned around and probably made it back to the trail in 15 minutes. By the time we got back to the trail, we didn't hear the voice calling our names anymore. We decided that maybe now would be a good time to take a quick rest and head back to the cabin, just in case that was really my uncle and maybe it was just the sound of the forest distorting him and then distorting the direction which his voice came from. We figured that was more plausible than somebody actually being out there, imitating him. So we get back to his cabin. It's probably closer to 3 or 4 p.m., and he was outside waiting for us, smoking his tobacco pipe, He takes one look at all of us and says, "You didn't listen, did you?" We didn't even say anything. He just gets up from his rocking chair and begins to chew us out and scold us like little kids. "I told you three to never veer off that path. You didn't listen to me. You're lucky nothing bad happened, because it could have, really quick. What did you see?" Neither my brother or I spoke up, but my sister instead did, telling him, "We thought we heard your voice, Uncle. But it's confusing because we heard you deeper in the forest, and..." Before she could even finish her sentence, he cut her off. "You listen to me good. Neither of you, I don't care what time of day, I don't care what I say, neither of you are going back out on that trail the rest of your time here. Do I make myself clear?" We were all so scared, and so we nodded. We never bothered to ask him what it was or what was out there on the trail, or beyond the trail. He seemed pretty angry and stern about his decision. But as a kid, I don't really know if you have the thought process and cognitive abilities to deep dive into this stuff and really, really think about it. As an adult, I reflect back and think, what did he know that was off the trail that was such a danger to us kids? He surely had to have known about something, saw something, heard something that he knew was not safe. But if that's the case, why did he let us on the trail in the first place? None of it really makes sense. I'll have to ask him now, but we don't really talk to him much anymore. But if I manage to get a hold of him, I'll try and see what I can find out, and I'll be sure to let you guys know.